So, when we think about group counseling, we often focus on the benefits: connection, support, shared healing. But behind every successful group is a framework of ethical principles that keep members safe and respected. So, let's begin by exploring one of the most important aspects of group work, and that is ethical issues related to group membership. From the moment a group is conceived, ethical questions arise. So, the questions like who gets to participate, who might be excluded, what are the implications of those decisions? For example, certain individuals may not be suitable for specific group formats due to the nature of their concerns or clinical needs, such as someone dealing with active psychosis in a high intensity trauma group. Ethically, leaders must screen potential members to ensure the group is appropriate for them and that their participation won't cause harm to others or themselves. Inclusion must be intentional, based not just on logistics or demographics, but on clinical fit, safety, and the purpose of the group. Once someone is invited to join, informed consent becomes essential. So, informed consent is more than just paperwork. It's a process of educating group members about what to expect. This includes the purpose and structure of the group, the leader's background and approach, potential benefits and risk, and the expectations for participation. Members need to know how long the group will run, how many people will be involved, and what the rules are, and under what circumstances information might be shared outside of the group, like if there's a threat of harm. Informed consent helps empower group members, giving them the autonomy to make decisions about their participation with clarity and awareness. It also sets the tone for transparency and trust between leaders and members from the start. And while group work can be healing, we also need to talk openly about the psychological risk that may come with group participation. Emotional safety is not guaranteed just because a group is well intentioned. Members may be triggered by someone else's story, experience social rejection, or feel pressured to disclose more than they are ready to share. Unskilled leadership can inadvertently shame or silence someone or fail to intervene when group dynamics become toxic. There's also the risk of scapegoating, and that's when one member becomes the target of group frustration or blame. And these risks aren't reasons to avoid group work, but they do highlight the need for strong ethical leadership, skilled facilitation, and clear agreements around respect, confidentiality, and choice. Which brings us to one of the most crucial pillars of ethical work: confidentiality. So, in individual therapy, confidentiality is relatively straightforward. There's one therapist and one client. But in group, the responsibility is shared among members. So, while leaders are bound by legal and ethical guidelines, members are not always held to the same standard, especially outside group room. So this is why it's essential to talk early and often about the expectations of confidentiality. So what happens in group stays in group. Members must understand that sharing what happens in group with outsiders, especially in identifying detail, can cause harm. And leaders should also encourage members to talk about their own experiences, but never about others. So even within the group, confidentiality means creating a space where it's safe to speak without fear of judgment or gossip or retaliation. So now let's turn our attention inward, specifically to the role of the group leader's values in shaping the group experience. So whether we realize it or not, our beliefs about healing, identity, power, and relationships often influence how we lead. Our values affect which interventions we use, how we respond to conflict, and how we interpret group dynamics. And that's not inherently unethical, it's human. But it becomes problematic when we impose those values onto others or fail to recognize how they differ from others, especially our clients. So, for example here, a leader who strongly believes in expressive vulnerability might push a more reserved member to share more quickly, assuming it's in their best interest. Self-awareness, supervision, and cultural humility help leaders stay grounded in ethical practice rather than unconsciously enacting personal agendas. So this is one of those things where you're constantly needing to self-reflect and self-assess yourself and where your biases might be, or in what your values are, or what your morals are, so that you're able to check yourself and say, this is what my opinion is. I understand that my opinion is just that. That is my truth. That is my opinion. So now I have to understand somebody else's truth, which is not going to be the same as mine. So what happens when there's a conflict of values? So between a leader and a group member, or between members themselves? Well, these situations are inevitable and ethically complex. A common example might be differing views on religion or parenting, gender roles, or political ideologies. The key here is to maintain a non-judgmental stance and create a space where multiple perspectives can coexist without invalidation. So ethically, we're not here to convert or correct, but to facilitate respectful dialogue and self-exploration. So if the conflict becomes disruptive, the leader may need to address it privately or in supervision. So the goal is not always resolution, but the ethical management of tension with care, boundaries, and compassion. So this leads us into a broader and equally critical conversation about diversity and ethics in group work. So ethical group practice must go beyond tolerance. It must actively honor and respond to diversity in race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, ability, socioeconomic status, and more. Group leaders have an ethical responsibility to consider how systems of oppression, cultural narratives, and historical trauma shape group interactions. For example, in a multicultural group, silence from some members may be misinterpreted as resistance when it, in actuality, reflects a cultural value of deference or fear of marginalization. Leaders must be trained to recognize these dynamics and adapt accordingly. So ethical practice here means not only cultural competence, but also cultural responsiveness, adjusting languages, expectations, and interventions to meet people exactly where they are. And this in turn brings us to the social justice approach to group work. So this perspective holds the healing cannot be separated from context. It acknowledges that many of the struggles clients bring into the group itself, like anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, are not just individual issues, but are also shaped by systemic inequalities, racism, sexism, ableism, and more. A social justice-oriented group leader doesn't just work on individual change, but also invites members to explore how their lives are shaped by power, privilege, and oppression. And this can mean validating anger about discrimination, or helping others to reclaim voice and agency, or supporting them in community action. It also means the leader is doing their own work, so examining how their social location and privilege influence the group space. So also looking closely at the ethical issues pertaining to sexual orientation in groups. So the LGBTQ plus clients often experience microaggressions, invalidation, or exclusion, even in helping spaces. So group leaders have a responsibility to ensure that queer and trans members are not only welcome but also affirmed. This includes using inclusive language, correcting discriminatory comments, and being aware of internalized stigma. It also means being sensitive to safety. Some members may not be out in all areas of their life, so participation in the group may put them at risk. So ethically, leaders must create a space where people can show up authentically without pressure to disclose or educate others. Again, cultural humility here and ongoing training are essential to making sure that you are up to date on the most current information and way of helping these clients. So when we talk about techniques in group work, ethics still apply. The use of group techniques, whether it's role play or guided imagery, art, or psychodrama, must always be intentional, appropriate, and informed. So leaders must consider each member's readiness, cultural background, and level of trust before introducing a technique. Some interventions can be powerful, but also re-traumatizing if used carelessly. So consent is key. Just because something works in theory doesn't mean that it's right for this group at this time. So ethical leaders check in with members before, during, and after using techniques, and always allow a way out without judgment. And let's not forget the importance of competence and training in all of this. So just because someone is a good individual counselor doesn't mean that they're automatically skilled in group work. So group dynamics and process observation and facilitation require specialized training and knowledge and supervised experience. Leaders must be trained not only in theory, but also in practice itself. So ethical group facilitators seek continuing education credits, attend workshops, engage in consultation, and reflect on their own growth areas that they're growing in. So competence isn't static. It evolves with new research and cultural changes and feedback from members. And that leads us to ethical and culturally relevant strategies for designing and facilitating groups. So a responsible group leader considers who the group is for, what the group goals are, and how power is distributed, and how safety is maintained. They create ground rules collaboratively, use inclusive language, remain open to feedback. Culturally relevant practice involves understanding the meaning of group participation in different communities. It also, for example, means that some cultures value community healing and storytelling, while others prioritize privacy and self-containment. So facilitators who take time to understand these values can build trust more effectively and avoid inadvertently causing harm to their clients. So how do students begin to train in these skills? Well, you're doing just that right now. One of the most effective ways, though, to gain skills is to participate in a small group as a member. Being on the other side of the process helps counselors to develop empathy, self-awareness, and insight into group dynamics. So students can notice how they respond in silence or conflict or feedback and emotional intensity. They begin to see the impact of leadership styles, the power of group norms, the vulnerability of opening up in a shared space. So ethics are no longer theoretical, they are lived and felt. Schools also provide safe, structured experiences with skilled facilitators and opportunities for reflection and discussion afterwards. So as you move up, you may actually be in a group dynamic. And this naturally ties into broader ethics in training group counselors. So ethical training programs doesn't just teach technique, they develop character and cultural humility and clinical judgment. They provide diverse case examples, promote dialogue about bias, and support students in understanding the ethics of their own identities. So training should include observation of experienced group leaders, role plays, process recordings, and supervised practice. Programs should also be transparent about emotional demands of group work and provide support to students who may be activated by their own personal histories as well. So now let's shift over to the legal realm. So legal liability and malpractice in group work are real concerns, especially when confidentiality is broken, and harm is caused, and informed consent is lacking. So group leaders can be held legally responsible if they fail to screen members properly, use inappropriate techniques, or ignore boundary violations, or do not respond to threats of harm. Malpractice claims can also arise when leaders act as outside of their scope of competence or violate ethical codes. So that's why documentation, supervision, and clear policies are essential. Legal safeguards protect not only the group members, but also the practitioners themselves. Speaking of which, what are some legal safeguards for group practitioners? So first, always obtain thorough, informed consent, ideally in writing. Document screening interviews, group rules, and any incidents that arise. Follow your profession's code of ethics. So whether it's the ACA, ASGW, NASW, or another. Use supervision regularly. And consult with colleagues when in doubt. Make sure that your malpractice insurance covers group work specifically. Know your state's laws regarding duty to warn, mandated reporting, and dual relationships. And when in doubt, consult legal counsel or your licensing board. The more proactive you are, the less vulnerable you'll be. So that is all that I have for you in this particular video. There will be a Module 3 Part 2 video, so I look forward to seeing you there.